think I'll ask the Dean of the Law School, Dean Rasmussen, to welcome us all to the program on behalf of the USC Gould Law School.
Thank you, Steve. As Steve said, my name is Bob Rasmussen, and I'm the Dean of the Gould School of Law, and it really is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to this event. I think after I say a few words, Steve's going to come back and talk a little bit about the program. So what I'd like to do for just a few minutes is maybe step back and think about the role that this institute plays in the mission of our law school and our university. If you think about it, the mission of a law school is to produce great attorneys, that we all understand that law is the method by which we govern ourselves in a free society. And it is the responsibility of lawyers to really be the guardians of law. Now, for generations, people have understood that great law schools train great lawyers by helping them engage in learning to be part of analytical and rigorous thinking. And we certainly do that in our classes here at the Gould School of Law. But a few decades ago, I think there was a very important realization, and that is, lawyers are good in rigorous thinking and making sure that government officials are not arbitrary, that there is a rationale to law. But that doesn't tell us anything about what law should be. What policies should our society pursue? So here at USC, starting in the 60s, we really started collaborating with other disciplines across the university and trying to think about, okay, what are the right policies that will help us achieve a more fair and just society? Because ultimately, that is the mission of a great university, to help society flourish, to help make our community better. And if we think about that symbiotic relationship between a great law school and a great university, we now can really see how the Sachs Institute fits in to that mission. That for too long, people really did not pay attention to issues of mental health. For years, mental health was really, if you will, in the shadows. Elyn's own personal story and the work of this institute is really bringing that situation out of the shadows. It really is helping us think about, as we try to evolve toward a better society, a more fair society, a society that embraces each of its members with dignity and respect. How can we help institute policies to bring that about? And that, I really think, is the mission of this institute, and it really helps augment the foundation of our law school to make our polity and our community a better place to live. So with those remarks, or before those remarks, I'd like to just say one more thing. And that is, quite frankly, thank you. That this institute does amazing work. But it's only possible to do that work because of the supporters that we have. And I know a lot of people have supported the institute, but I'd like to take just a brief moment to acknowledge some key people who really make the work of this foundation and this institute possible. First, I'd like to acknowledge George Handren, Scott Schmid, and the Sidney R. Baird Jr. Foundation for their support of the institute. I would also like to acknowledge Jennifer and Gary Huff. I'd like to point out my personal friends, Rich and Chris Getz. I would like to thank Gina Nickel and the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care. And finally, the unwavering support of the Sachs family. So can we give them all a round of applause for helping make this possible? Thank you, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to the chair of the board of the Sachs Institute, Steve Benke.
Thank you, Dean Rasmussen. My name is Stephen Benke, and on behalf of the Sachs Institute Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you all to our program this afternoon. The Sachs Institute is an interdisciplinary program that translates ideas into action to better the lives of individuals with mental illness. And I would like to second the thanks that Dean Rasmussen gave to all of our donors and people who make the work of the Sachs Institute possible. I'd also like to thank Dean Rasmussen and Vice Dean Scott Bice for their unwavering support of the Sachs Institute and the conversations the Sachs Institute has begun at USC. Your vision for the Institute and your presence at Institute events has sent a clear signal about the importance you attach to understanding the unique needs of students with mental illness and the rich and the varied contributions these students bring to the law school and to the wider university community. So thank you for your support. We are at best as community when we create a welcoming and affirming response to all who enter our space. This discourse moves forward when individuals with mental illness are willing to tell their stories. The stories that we hear are stories that at their heart are about community, ways that communities have nurtured and supported individuals with mental illness, and ways that communities have at times failed. The Sachs Institute is committed to exploring how academic communities can do better at creating spaces where individuals with mental illness may flourish. Students are at the center of our programs. Today we have 4 wonderful panelists, and we have a student who is speaking for the first time in a venue such as this about his life with mental illness. Sam is smart and eloquent, and so he makes this look easy. It's not. Speaking for the first time in this venue takes courage, and I would like to begin our program as we always begin our programs at the Sachs Institute by recognizing Sam and all those students who have the courage to step forward and speak about living their lives with mental illness. Our program today will begin with Eric McCormack, who will speak from his perspective, playing a neuroscience professor with paranoid schizophrenia who consults with law enforcement and the FBI on a television show. After Eric makes his remarks, Jessie Close will make her remarks. I am delighted especially to know that in a very short while, Jessie will come out with her new book titled Resilience, 2 Sisters and a Story of Mental Illness. I am so appreciative of Eric and Jessie and Sam and of course my dear friend Elyn for spending their time this afternoon. I want to say as he begins his remarks, a word about Eric. Eric approaches these issues with curiosity and with respect. He plays a character on television, and it is hugely important that he get it right. And in order to get it right, Eric has spent a lot of time studying and speaking to individuals with schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. He's here with us today. He's a mensch, and we are grateful to have him with us.
I think I have this. Does this work? Is this mic good enough? Yes, it is. Looking around, I can't help but wonder how much could be accomplished if Tojo's would introduce lecturers to their restaurants. Look what we're doing today. We're enjoying sandwiches and we're learning. Allow me to open with an unavoidable cliche. I am not a professor, nor am I a person living with paranoid schizophrenia. I just play one on TV. To stand here today is the equivalent of me thinking I can fly a 747 because I once dressed up as a pilot for Halloween, which, by the way, is a very lame Halloween costume. That I am here means that I must have done something right in portraying Dr. Daniel Pierce for the last 3 seasons on my show Perception. And I attribute that in part to the inspiration that I received from Dr. Elyn Sachs. When I took the role in 2010, it was important to me, as Stephen said, that I got the academic part right, the lectures that my character gives at the beginning and end of every script, his medical pronouncements and his opinions. They'd already been carefully researched by our writers, Ken Biller and Mike Sussman, and I augmented that with meetings with neuroscience professors at UCLA and at the University of British Columbia. But more importantly, my brilliant doctor also suffered with paranoid schizophrenia, and I was determined to get that condition right out of the gate. I talked to Dr. Michael Green at UCLA. I read Oliver Sacks' books. But the turning point came when I opened Elyn's award-winning self-portrait, The Center Cannot Hold. Any doubts I had that a respected university professor with full-blown schizophrenia could possibly be a believable TV character vanished. As accurate as the pilot script was, though, it was still up to me to make the physical and emotional choices that doctors and patients alike would recognize and approve. They had to be bold, but they also had to be subtle. Universal, but also individual. And they had to be consistent right from the beginning. They also had to be rooted in a history that producers, they hadn't yet spelled out. It's just a pilot. Elyn's harrowing tales of writing a brilliant legal essay on a Friday and then committing herself to a mental ward secretly on a Saturday hit me very hard. The idea that even the greatest mind could fall victim to something bigger than all its intelligence, an enemy within, was devastating. But considering the three-dimensional character I needed to build, it was also incredibly enlightening. I realized that Daniel couldn't be a cliche. He couldn't be a series of predictable tics. He needed to be someone that the TV audience hadn't seen before, an extremely high-functioning, overachieving, complex man living with what's usually considered a debilitating disease. The book was great, but I knew that if I was really going to get this right, I had to go to the source. So 4 years ago this month, I sat down with Elyn at USC here to observe this woman living with this disease for 40 years, being treated with such respect and reverence at her school was absolutely inspirational. And believe me, I asked her a lot of questions. The real engine of perception of the show is also its biggest risk. Because of bad experiences in the past, and quite frankly, because of intellectual hubris, Dr. Pierce is not on his meds. This allows the character to freely hallucinate, not just voices, but visual hallucinations as well. One thing we strived for from the outset was to give the audience both an objective view of someone having a break with reality, and at the same time, give them a taste of the often terrifying subjective experience for the patient. For me, as an actor, this meant shooting a scene both ways, with another actor playing my hallucination, often at my ear, over my shoulder, then shooting it as the other characters would see it. Dr. Pierce talking to no one, arguing only with himself. Like in the film version of A Beautiful Mind, the revelation that certain characters were just voices in my head was just as shocking to the audience as it was to my character. While I worried that that shock might grow stale over time, that the audience would be ahead of us, or worse, that people like Elyn would find, and Sam would find the device vulgar or unrealistic, I discovered with much relief that the opposite was true. that not only did people living with mental illness respond favorably, relieved to see some representation of their painful experience on screen, but people with no experience of the disease outside of the crazy guy in the corner were reminded again and again that that crazy guy was actually hearing or seeing something all too real for him, that he was a person too, with a life, with a past, and with a family. So what does all this have to do with our conversation today? Well, one of Daniel's recurring hallucinations over the 3 seasons has been a vision of himself as a young man, at the age when he was a student at the same Chicago University that he now teaches at. It was a devastating reveal for our viewers when the cocky kid that Daniel's been tutoring and knocking heads with turned out to be his own younger self, only days before his first psychotic break. Shooting that episode, I was reminded of Elyn's experience that she writes about at Oxford and Yale, and that so many brilliant minds first experienced the symptoms of schizophrenia and other mental illnesses at that age, at this age, in college. We would eventually shoot an episode that will air this winter in which Pierce tries to warn his younger self of the perils that lie ahead. Of course, that scene, shot objectively, was just Pierce standing alone in the moonlight, talking to himself. It was heartbreaking. What becomes so obvious to me over the course of the last 3 years of shooting this show is that the stigma of mental illness, like any stigma, is the result of ignorance. People fear and despise what they don't understand. And when the media only discusses schizophrenia after there's been a mass shooting, it only increases that fear and that ignorance in this country. I know everyone in this room wants to change that, and I'm humbled and honored to be here today with these brilliant minds pretending to know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fabulous. My name is Jessie Close, and I live with bipolar I disorder. I never finished high school. Because of my parents' travel, I was enrolled in 8 schools over 9.5 years. I finally dropped out after 2 weeks of 10th grade at Pacific Palisades High School. My legal guardian at the time was my 24-year-old pregnant sister, Tina. She was terrified that a truant officer would arrive on her doorstep, but no one ever came. I may as well not have been enrolled. Tina sent away for a correspondence course and set up a friend of hers as my supervisor, but I refused to cooperate. Instead, I set up a reading program for myself covering history, literature, and poetry, the only subjects I was interested in. After reading a book, I would write an essay about it. I would also write papers about my own various philosophies. I loved learning. I hated school. But then a friend of mine from back east arrived to stay with us for a couple of weeks while her mother packed up and moved to LA. Valley, who also dropped out, and I spent our days down at Santa Monica Beach, loaded up with filterless cigarettes and baby oil. We would walk down Temescal Canyon right in the middle of the road because that road was still under construction, and I am that old. We would smoke weed and cigarettes and walk on the new yellow lines. Needless to say, my time of learning anything beyond Drugs 101 came to an end. I endured life in LA for 6 more years. By then, I had graduated from Drugs 101 to consumer of hard drugs, including my favorites, speed, cocaine, and LSD. Alcohol, of course, washed everything down. My parents stepped in, and I moved to Tucson, where my grandmother lived. I had always wanted to attend college, so since I had just turned 21, I was able to attend Pima Community College instead of suffering through a GED. Community colleges rock. I earned a 4.0, which allowed me to continue on at American University in DC. But something else was happening, something sinister and out of my control. My moods began to dictate to me to cycle. Each time I plummeted from the high of mania into depression, I would berate myself and declare that I wasn't going to get so out of control again. These words would be my mantra while I lay in bed, miserable, embarrassed, unable to take care of myself, too ashamed to face anyone. I remember testing myself to see if the good me was back in full force. If I could write a poem, then I was better. If not, I would continue to despair. When I arrived in D.C., I rented a studio apartment up the hill from Georgetown. The place was a dark ground floor unit with bars on the windows. This environment helped lead me to my first psychotic break. When I was sitting at my desk studying, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I turned and I saw me sitting on my bed. I saw a pale self with dark smudges under my eyes that looked at me, my long hair hanging down like swamp moss. I froze and very slowly turned away from the sight. When I looked back, my heart pounding, I was gone. After that, I couldn't leave my apartment. I was stuck inside as surely as the door had no handle. I ate everything I had, and when I finally got down to a head of iceberg lettuce, I knew I would have to force myself to open the door. At American University, I declared a major in law, a minor in literature. I had been introduced to business law at Pima Community College, and I loved it. But I remember my mother visiting and me telling her my plans and her face growing somber and she telling me that she didn't think I could do that. She knew my mood swings, even though my family didn't know what to do about them. I think they tried to protect me from myself as much as they could. They thought it was me, not mental illness. The dawning 70s did not bring any understanding to mental health issues, not that I knew of. Mental health was not in our vocabulary. Neither were the words manic depression, which was what bipolar disorder was called back then. When I finally returned to class, I also looked up campus psychiatric help. By this time, I was manic, and my appointment with a psychiatrist was a waste of time. He was very good looking, so I spent my time flirting with him and being as wonderful as I could be while manic, which was very wonderful. I left his office never to darken his door again. As usual, when manic, I had no time for anyone who didn't want to play. I knew I was different. With the audacity of mania, I knew I was charming and beautiful. Who wouldn't want to be with me? I was blonde, for God's sake. After a year, I dropped out of American University, too. The last of my formal schooling took place at Manhattanville College in New York State. I challenged myself to a summer graduate course in philosophy. I passed with an A-. I figured I was smart enough to continue on with life without any more college. I was too young, too isolated, and too mentally ill to realize I was doing myself a great disservice. Depression got my attention. Mania just was. I saw no fault in feeling great. Drugs and alcohol softened that awful feeling of energy pushing itself out and through my skin. And drugs and alcohol worsened depressions when they inevitably arrived after a manic phase. I was in my early 20s and thought that this was just how I was. Many years passed before I got the help I needed. But before I was properly diagnosed in 2004 and given the right medications, I left a flattened path of husbands, houses, and cars in my wake. I honestly don't know how many cars I've traded in. Once I learned about balloon payments, I was all over it. houses were more trouble to get ready, and inevitably, once they were cleaned up and ready for the marketplace, my mood would change and I'd want to stay. Unfortunately, the real estate agents wouldn't see it that way. I moved Maddie and myself 12 times in 8 years. Now I watch House Hunters on TV. But husbands were the most trouble. I went through 5. It's easier to keep track of husbands. 3 of them told me I just can't take this anymore, and 2 died many years after we divorced. So now that I've passed the husband's quota, and now that I don't get manic or drunk anymore, I live with only my dogs. Any correlation you may make is strictly your own. Then my son, Elyn, developed schizoaffective disorder. His symptoms beginning in his early teens, blooming and taking care of him, control of him when he was 18. By the time he was 19, he had been hospitalized. He came home for vacations, but stayed at the hospital for 2 years. My family finally began learning the vocabulary of mental illness. When Elyn was hospitalized, I was so distraught that I had to get away. I flew out here to LA and stayed with friends in Malibu for 6 days. I stayed in bed crying for all that time. My grief was so profound that I knew if I walked down to the water, I would be swept away by my grief, my lack of a hold on our earth. By age 50, I'd gone beyond knowing something was terribly wrong. But what? Elyn broke the mold, and my family saw that I needed help too. I went to the hospital when I was 50. I began a medication that worked miracles. I could function without fear or confusion or anxiety. Then that medication turned on me with a rare side effect. I ended up in the hospital again, and the grief I felt was the weight of the world. I began another medication that didn't work as well as the first, but it allowed me to leave the house, have conversations even though verbal fluency wasn't what it had been with the first medication. It took me a long time to absorb the loss. The inherent feeling that whirled around me when depressed was overwhelming. When it finally sank in that I had been alive but not living over so many years, that I had sacrificed my youth, my adulthood, my relationships, my children, to the mental illness that lived in my brain like a creature, I fell into deep grief. Depression and grief can feel the same, but they're not. Depression cuts me off at the knees. Grief slammed me into a wall. But I did get through it. I got through that wall, as did my son, Elyn. He is now 33, and I am 61. With the help of family and friends, I've gotten to where I can give love, give back, like today. I'm standing in front of you today because life is a miracle. If you live with mental illness, take care of yourself. Keep pushing, and gifts will appear. Find a therapist or counselor you can talk to. Stay in school. Don't give up. Try again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie. That was amazing. So we're gonna chat today, particularly about mental illness and college at this particular time of life, and we're going to be joined by someone who's in the midst, Sam Brown, who is third year here at the law school. Yes, and we just wanted Sam to tell a little bit about himself before we start.
So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Sam Brown. As Eric said, I'm a third-year student here at USC Gould School of Law. Last year, I was a student scholar at the Sachs Institute, where I researched and wrote an article on the role that the legal community has played and continues to play in increasing stigma around mental illness. But the reason I'm up here with this distinguished panel, Steve already gave away, is that when I was 18 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1. What that moment meant for me, that moment of diagnosis, was that I'm sitting in a hospital. I've been there for about 2.5 days. There's a doctor. Before that 2.5 days, I've sort of been on a 5 to 7 day experience, odyssey, adventure, whatever you want to call it, giving pretty textbook manic symptoms. A lot of energy. I was super charismatic. Everybody loved me until they kind of just got sick of listening to me talk. I wasn't sleeping a lot. So I'm there 2.5 days in the hospital, and the doctor says, you have bipolar. We think you have bipolar disorder. It's a life-threatening condition. And I've never heard of bipolar disorder at this point. This was 2002. And the first thing I think of, and I think the first thing I said was like, do I have to get brain surgery? Because for whatever reason, I had this image of like my brain had like enlarged or was like off kilter, which it was, but was sort of enlarged or off kilter. And then they sort of explained, no, it's a mood disorder. The reason it can be dangerous is because of like the mood you're in. This elevated mood you've been in for the last several days. That can be dangerous. So I had a couple reactions. The first was I was glad that I didn't have to have brain surgery after all. The second was that it gave me a scientific explanation for the way I've been feeling for the last 8 days. And for anyone who's sort of suffered through mental illness, people, when you suffer through depression, you have all these explanations that you come up with yourself why you feel the way you do, right? So when you're depressed, you're like, I'm not good enough, or inadequacy, or I'm not trying hard enough. When you're manic or bipolar, there might be more frightening explanations you come up with, like, I'm Jesus Christ, or, like I'm the Messiah, or things like this. So when you hear a doctor saying, like, no, you have this condition, it really was a sense of security for me. It was like, oh, okay, there's an explanation here. And also, the fact that it was a mood disorder and it wasn't, a cancer in my brain or something physical that had to be lopped off or something, it sort of forced me almost immediately to realize that this was a part of me, that this was sort of my mood, was myself, my personality, everything, my consciousness. This was a part of that. This was going to be attached to that, and I was just going to have to, deal with it. So, I listened to the doctors. I took the medication they told me to take. I did the things they told me to do. I got out about 5 days later. This all happened about a month before I was due to go to UCLA for college. I was living in Chicago at the time, so there was some talk, maybe I shouldn't go so far away for college, things like that. It was really important to me that I did go away to college. I wanted to get even further away from Chicago after this had happened, but also I wanted to not be limited by what had happened to me. I wanted to go where I thought I was going to go for school. I ended up starting in January instead of the fall of my freshman year, which UCLA was accommodating enough. I think we made one phone call and said, like, I had a medical issue and I couldn't start till January. And for whatever reason, they said, okay, that's fine. They didn't even ask anything further. They didn't ask for a doctor's note, anything like that. So I got to UCLA in January, sort of kept taking my meds, kept doing the right stuff, was successful at school for about 3 years. Then it was really technically the beginning of my senior year because I had started, the end of my third year at school, I had another episode. I had another sort of manic odyssey around campus. And some good friends of mine, some fraternity brothers of mine got me into the hospital and we started the whole thing over again. I got back on meds, back leveled out. It was a little tougher the second time to recover. I ended up for the first time feeling some of the stigma that occurs. I'd had a summer job for much of my life at a camp that I really enjoyed, and there was some stigma associated with that, and all of a sudden it wasn't the best place for me to be, because they heard about what had happened to me, and so it wasn't the best place. That made things really difficult, but I ended up going back to school, finished, graduated. That was in 2006. So the last time I've been in the hospital was 2006, and I graduated school in the spring of 2007. Afterwards, stayed in Los Angeles for a little while, tried to write a book. I don't have an agent yet, if there's any agents out there. I wrote this novel, so I can quit law school if you'll give me that. But was in a band, tried to do the creative thing. Went back to Chicago for a little while, worked as a truck driver, and then I started law school a few years ago. And I'm here. I think that maybe I've told one person at law school this story, and I don't think it was out of any sort of fear or lack of acceptance. I think it was just after what had happened to me at this camp with this job, I sort of realized that being tight-lipped was not the worst thing for this. And so, it's not that I don't trust and love all of my friends who are out in the audience, but, yeah. That's my story as of now.
When I started to do the research, particularly with Elyn's book, what amazed me, so much of the stigma I think we have, because unless you have someone in the family, we too often associate mental illness with a homeless guy, with someone that doesn't, and yet here it is in all three cases. Higher learning is where it happened. Someone pushing their brains. All three of you pushed your brains so hard to become the best person you can. It happened at a college. How much do you think individually that contributed to a moment, to your first break, when it happened, how it happened? And how much, the opposite, how much do you think it helped, the fact that you were surrounded by all of this and not alone in an apartment? Now, obviously you were alone a lot of the time, but it was at various schools that this happened. Was that a blessing or a curse?
I think this was a long time ago. I had never even heard of manic depression, or of course I've heard of schizophrenia, but that's kind of universal. The stress of school probably helped bring it on, but it typically hits young women in their early 20s. Young men is usually a little earlier, in their late teens. So I don't know. I just toss up there.
When I had my break, I guess we call it a break. When I had my break in school, when I had an episode in school, it was certainly part of the stress associated with school, and sort of the nature of bipolar sometimes is that it's like the sort of energy you need to succeed at a high level of education, at law school particularly. But at undergraduate school, you're doing a lot and you're achieving a lot, and you're also very active socially. But it actually helped me a lot to be in that community, I think. I can't say enough good things about UCLA. I know this is USC, so we can't say too many good things about UCLA. But I can't say enough about being in that community when it occurred. I was living in a fraternity house at the time, and you won't hear in the tales of great American mental health advocates, you won't hear the word fraternity thrown around a lot. But my fraternity brothers were incredible. They were incredibly supportive. They didn't blink when when a lot of them knew already, but they didn't blink when this happened. And at UCLA, being around, you're at a hospital where it's one of the best hospitals in the world. They have some of the leading bipolar researchers in the world there. So that felt very comforting to me, to be in that world and not be somewhere very far away where there might not be open minds and there might not be people willing to sort of lift me up the way that I had people around me at that time.
For me, school was both stressful and a great asset. Stressful because you're trying to learn a lot and do well and being judged and that kind of thing. For me, though, I kind of say my mind is both my best friend and my worst enemy. When I'm working, when I'm reading, when I'm constructing an argument, when I'm writing a counter-argument, the crazy stuff recedes more to the sidelines. So I have a focus and a sense of purpose. And so for me, it's been being in a university environment as a student was both stressful and enormously helpful.
Right. Obviously, you had a different experience for different reasons. Time has passed. As you talked about, there was just a tremendous ignorance. You didn't know about it. No one else around you would have known about it. You also talked about something that we try to bring up on the show occasionally, which is that idea of shame. And I know that Elyn talks about that in her book, that not only do you not know what's happening to you, but you can't tell anyone. And when it comes out at the wrong time in the wrong way. And Elyn has the story on the rooftop with two friends that are sort of going, what are you talking about? What are you doing? And that's got to be terrifying. What I find amazing when I read your book and to hear you today, there is self-awareness. It's not like where you wake up the next morning and go, what happened to me? You're aware of these things happening to you. Mm-hmm. And I'm fascinated by your ability to remember them, to write them down, to experience them, and yet you did not at any point in your 20s or 30s go to a doctor. It didn't occur to you that it was something that you were vastly different than some of the people around you.
Right. No.
And that's got to become shameful. That this is who I am and I can't help it.
Yeah.
That's, I imagine, one of the greatest things that has to be dealt with in a college atmosphere is creating ways that students can have early detection, that they whether it be lectures or something, so that they don't feel that sense. I mean,
Right, and sex education, we do driver's
Right.
education. Why don't we do mental health education so people know what some of the signs and symptoms are?
how did it affect? You talked about telling you some of your. Well, actually, you mentioned that there's only a few people here that know, but some of the guys at UCLA, you told felt that you felt okay to tell them.
Yeah, when I first got out, when it first happened to me before starting school, I mean, my family and friends were just so sort of on the ball of just like, all right, nothing's changed, nothing's changed. So I came out with this open attitude about it, and it was like probably told like too many people, actually probably like told girls too quickly while I was courting them, But
By the way, I'm bipolar 1, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, when I was first diagnosed, I called my sister Glenn, and she said, "Oh, thank God that it's actually something and you're not just crazy."
And I think that in my experience anyway, that it tends to be the people around you, your friends, your family, who are hopefully going to be most willing to, because they love you, to sort of to accept you. But I think the things that terrify me, and the things that still terrify me, and I think the real problems that we have to solve is that, we're talking about employers. I'm a third year, so I'm looking forward to employment. We're talking about employers. We're talking about law school admissions. We're talking about the California State Bar, where to be a lawyer in California, you need to tell them that you had a mental illness. You need to waive your medical privacy. I mean, these are real things that just happen now. So I think that's the difficulty. I mean, like those of you who have been in a hiring situation, I mean, are you going to be able to hear or find out about someone applying for this job, and just be able to say, well, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter that person has a mental illness. Or, or your babysitter. Maybe you have a great new babysitter for your kids. They've been working with you for 2-3 years. All of a sudden you find out somehow, or whatever reason, that they had a break and they have an illness. Are you willing to say to yourself, well, there's no reason this person can still watch my kids? Or is that sort of fear and stigma getting us set in? Because to me, that's the hurdle. It's not the people right around you. It's the rest of the world. People in these real positions of power, and the way they treat you can really knock you down a peg or lift you up.
So I think self-stigma is a problem as well. So I met with Jessie and Glenn, who have Bring Change to Mind, and they had done a public service announcement with T-shirts that say schizophrenia, friend of schizophrenia, or whatever, and they gave me a T-shirt. And my first thought was, well, I don't really wear T-shirts to work during the week, but I do wear them on weekends. And then I thought, do I really want to wear a T-shirt that identifies me as having schizophrenia? And then I thought, I've also had cancer. People wear armbands and pins and T-shirts in pride, with solidarity, and without shame. And that's the way it should be with schizophrenia too, but it's not. And I myself am guilty of those negative, shameful feelings.
I was always scared that parents of my daughter's little friends would find out and wouldn't allow their friends over to our house. Over to our house, which, would have been hurtful. They never found out.
The worst thing about stigma is it deters people from getting care, and people shouldn't have to suffer, but they will unless they get care.
Do you, particularly since your son was diagnosed, do you, as you write, do you think about your life, how it would have been different had someone, a doctor, a significant friend, how much, if someone had caught you early on? Clearly,
yeah.
it can be the world of difference.
Devastating when I really realized what, maybe I would have gone to law school, maybe I would have done this, maybe I would have done that, but now it's not, I guess I could go to law school, but I wouldn't choose to at this age, and I have nothing to prove, so.
It's okay.
Go for it.
So outside of the your immediacy, you're talking about the world at large. With college campuses, aside from things like this, what do you think? What would you recommend there be in place? I mean, how's the best way to do what Elyn's talking about? Remove the self-stigma and the stigma in general at this level.
I think there's a couple things. I think sort of referencing what I said before, I think having just people with a community around them at college, I mean, that's just important. That's general stuff. We want colleges that have, strong groups that people can be a part of. But I also think that there's a real danger in going at this problem too aggressively. And I would hate to ever see a college campus where, I showed up, my first day I showed up and I went to register with the Office of Students with Disabilities at UCLA. It was sort of strange. I just walked in. I think my wife was asking me this. She's like, what was that all about? Like, who told you to do that? And I don't think I really thought about it. I just kind of went in. But that information never got anywhere. I never walked around there with this label on my head that, when I dropped a semester or dropped a quarter, I would have to go through some evaluation to get back in. I know a lot of people propose these type of things, like if you take a semester off, your return should be conditioned on passing some sort of test or going to therapy and things like that. Those scare me when I hear stuff like that. I think that it can be, we don't want a campus where someone feels afraid to come out. But I think lastly, it comes down to finding a place for people with mental illness as a group and a strong group identity. We sort of talk about cancer survivors have a strong group identity. Sort of the history of oppressed, minorities and peoples come out with a strong sense of community and who they are, and they're sort of proud of what they've had to go through. And I think we need that for the mental health community, and it's hard because it's such an individualized illness. I think when you're part of sort of a subjugated minority or different things, you sort of can come together. You're defined as a group, whereas mental illness is so individual. We all feel it in different ways. We all experience it at different times. So to the extent that the university can foster that culture and that community, a place for it. Not just Mental Health Awareness Week where we all make sure we're not sick, but Mental Health Awareness Week where we celebrate this part of our world and our population, because we are a part of we're a part of the whole thing. We don't just have something we're trying to lop off, our shoulder or tumor we're trying to get out and be done with it.
Obviously, where I come from is the media, the fictional side of it, but so much of the stigma, so much of people's prejudice comes from something they saw either on the news, which, if something tragic happens, that's going to be a 24-hour news cycle for the longest time, and people will start throwing words like schizophrenic around. There's also the dramatic shows where inevitably for so many years the bad guy was the crazy guy on the rooftop, and who does not get enough. What we've tried to do in our show sometimes, because my character actually suffers with something, he becomes a bit of a champion for those that are wrongly accused, which so often happens. You can be diagnosed with something, and that's clearly going to lead to this, but it is so often not the case. How do you, growing up, before you had your first break, before you thought of yourself as someone that had mental illness, how did you see, were you subject to the same prejudices? Were you watching how it was represented in film and television and the news? And did that contribute, do you think, to the self-stigma, to the shame?
I don't know. I love shows like Law and Order and Criminal Minds, and they definitely have a lot of crazy people on there. Law and Order seems to handle it better than a show like Criminal Minds, but I think there's a place for it if they actually talk about the situation, and I think they've gotten some pretty good shows out of the situation where they could have kind of made fun.
Do you feel it's gotten better over time?
I do.
Certainly since the 70s and 80s.
Well, it depends on the show,
Yeah.
I guess, but I know Law and Order has run for 50 years, so,
Well, take a show like Criminal Minds or The Blacklist now. It is necessarily every week about someone with something going wrong upstairs. That's
Right.
everyone. That's why it's called Criminal Minds. So it's definitely, obviously, in danger of sensationalizing, trivializing.
Right.
Sam, do you feel like that's been...
Yeah, and I'll admit right now, I'm still affected by that after knowing, what I have and attempting to be this sort of open-minded, liberal about it and stuff like that. I'm still sort of affected by, massive news coverage of, mass shootings and sort of that's sort of more the news media, but things in drama too. And I mean, I hope we can all sort of accept that we can admit that, like, when you sit on the expo line on the way home today and, like, there might be a crazy person or a schizophrenic, clearly homeless there making sort of weird motions. I think we'd be lying if we say, like, we all don't sort of bristle up for a second, you know, and I think that's a lot the product of the news, of the media and things like that. I don't know how we solve that necessarily. I don't think it makes good news stories when, like, mentally ill people, like, take their medication and, like, go on their day. You know, like, that's, you know, this might get news story. We might have a news story on this, but it will not be like 24/7 on CNN. You know, so.
I mean, when I look back, I think there weren't that many shows that portrayed mental illness. I mean, we have that now. You know, Monk, the OCD guy, and Daniel Pierce, and the person on there's a show with the bipolar woman. I forget who. Yeah. And I think it's really good to portray the illnesses accurately and sensitively, and I think we're doing that more than we used to. And in terms of stigma generally, I think media is really important. And one thing they can do is, you know, if there's violence, contextualize it. You know, only a small percentage of violence is committed by mentally ill people, and people with mental illness are much likelier to be victimized, you know, 20 times likelier to be murdered or whatever the statistic is. And then not only contextualize violence, but tell success stories. And in a sense, Daniel Pierce is a success story. He's, you know, he's got schizophrenia, he struggles with it, he doesn't completely accept it, but he functions and you know, lives in the world. So I think the media is getting better.
Well, compared to 30 years ago, I mean, there was nothing. Right. So, you know, just the fact that you're playing this character, it's a huge statement to the media looking at mental illness.
On a personal level, because that's often what we deal with in the show too, is as much as he is a teacher and a lecturer and he's spouting facts, and it's also about how does this affect your personal life, your romantic life? I mean, one thing you talk about in the book, Elyn, is that, you know, the boyfriends you might have had for a bit, that went away for a long time until you found your husband, really. Sam, you were saying that you were married, so that there's sounds like a success story.
Just like a month ago, right?
Yes, 6 weeks ago.
And that's right, fantastic. And you obviously loved marriage. You did it so many times. But yes. But obviously, three very different stories. It took a long time for you to find it. You found it young, and congratulations. You found it was very hard for you, hard for them. How does that? Let me ask Sam, because it's just happened. And how did you deal with it? How did you tell your wife to be?
I mean, as I referenced earlier, I have a hard time sort of not telling somebody immediately. It's sort of it's a nice litmus test. I think at some point I seem to think it makes me like seem complicated, you know. So like this is like, you know, how are you gonna you know. I mean, she's like way too good looking for me, so I'm like, how am I gonna even up these odds? You know? I'm gonna be complicated and brooding. But I think but to be honest, I think it's super important. I mean, you need someone to sort of know who you are really quickly, and it's not something. I mean, it's not something you're gonna like hide from them. I don't know. It's like we've been together for 6 months. Like now I've tricked you, and now like, you know, if I tell you this, like you'll accept me. So I think. I mean, it definitely has had problems in the past. I mean, a couple ex-girlfriends would tell you, like, it was a big problem, you know? Like, it was like, I was using this as an excuse for this or whatever, and, like, you think your life's so complicated, like, mine's complicated too, and, like, you know, you become the monopoly on the complicated one in the relationship, which, like, nobody necessarily likes to have. So I think it's, I think that it's a concern.
And how has it been? I mean, whenever I read about you, it sounds like it's worked out beautifully for you, which is
in terms of
your marriage. You say in the book a number of times that you just never thought you'd find that person or be able to be married.
I dated normally in high school and college, and I went 18 years with a few dates in the middle, not dating at all. I was too tormented by internal demons and had the usual psychological mishigas that I worked on in therapy. But I never thought that would happen, and it's really been an important, you know, and wonderful thing in my life. Actually, so Will used to work here at the law library for 15 years, and there's kind of a funny story. We went to lunch, and then he invited me to go see the Poppies in Lancaster. So I go and I'm saying how chilly it is, hoping he'll put his arm around me, and he never does, which kind of leaves me feeling very deflated. But then at the end of the day, he kisses me a long, lingering kiss goodnight. And the thought I had, and I swear to God, this was my thought, was, this is even better than getting an article accepted.
Elyn Sachs, you are such a romantic. We'd like to take a moment, take 15 minutes or so, and hear from you.
The only human beings who must be reported to their professional agency when they seek due process after a mental health hold are lawyers. So the clerk of the court must send a notification to the state bar when a lawyer is involved. Doesn't happen with anybody else. And that law was passed by lawyers too. So what is your future? How do you see attacking this issue? And if you are interested in support in doing that, I'll give you my card.
Yeah, well, the field of law I want to get into is actually employment law and employee rights. I think that that's going to come into play if we are successful in what we're doing here and we get treatment out in universities and we have the next generation of college students are seeking help, getting diagnoses, receiving help. They're going to be sitting in front of an interview panel somewhere. They're going to be taking the bar exam. They're going to have to write down on the California State Bar that, the medical community doesn't even ask their doctors whether they have something, but the legal community does, which is interesting. But we're going to be sitting down in front of people who are going to have like a 1960s, 1970s sort of opinion on a lot of these matters. So that's where I want to go individually is look out for sort of the next generation of students when they're inevitably treated poorly at the hands of their employers. But I think that on the specific legal front, I think the legal community, like tomorrow, the State Bar of California can get together tomorrow and, read an article or two that are on Westlaw, because there's plenty of law review articles about it that just say, like, look, there's no purpose behind asking this question. Like, it's borderline offensive and illegal. You're lawyers, so no one's ever going to win a lawsuit against you for it. But it's just the right thing to do to change and examine the way you ask somebody that question.
Sam wrote a really great paper on moral fitness and bar applications, which is being published.
Which is being published.
Right.
Who else? More ideas?
I'd like to just share a moment of my first meeting Elyn out here. When I first came out to see Elyn at USC. I'm on the other coast, so I've been brought up in a totally different way. I've been fascinated in the last 22 years or so that I've been involved in the field. If you don't know, I'm the trustee of the Sidney R. Bear Foundation, and Elyn invited me out, met with her, she introduced me to 5 of her law students, and then she said, I want you to know that George has the best job in the whole world. He gives money away for mental health. And she said, I also have to tell you that he worked for somebody that I feel very close to, because Sidney Bear and I both got kicked out of Yale. He in 1938, and I think that Yale isn't much better in 2014 than it was in 1938. I know Harvard isn't, but I'm incredibly impressed, and the dean should be very proud of what I see USC doing and what I see USC, both undergrad and graduate, and the fact that you could have been smart enough to have recognized the brilliance of Elyn Sachs, and she and I have talked a number of years about this, that had Sidney Bear been her age and had a different kind of support, or I think Jessie, this is the same in the support she's had and the help that she's had medically, that we would have had a totally different situation. Sidney Bear was suffering from schizophrenia. He was kicked out of Yale in 1938. He never got over it. One of the things we are working on is giving scholarships for people who need to go to school. And what we have to understand is, let's get rid of the stigma, but let's also understand that mental health has nothing to do with intelligence. And he was intelligent, he was brilliant, he went to 3 different schools, he never got past six months, could have done amazing things. And I just am so grateful to see this program is so wonderful. This is what we should be doing all over the world. But Elyn is the paradigm of virtue. She's just fabulous. Thank you.
So you're our biggest funder, our biggest supporter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. I can't imagine calling you anything else because that's what you've been in our house for the last several years. So to think your name is Eric just goes like, what?
Call me Dr. Pierce.
Okay. I can so relate to what y'all are saying. I have struggled with mental illness myself. It seems like all my life, but I'm sure there was a little period in there where maybe I was normal. Mostly really severe depression. And I want to speak to the whole issue of school. For me, school was a place where I could feel like I could do something. And especially since I always thought I wasn't very smart, so then to be able to go to school and make that work. So I would work 40, 50 hours a week and then go to school at night. One of my master's degrees is from here, but I just went to school way too long. But it was a way that counterbalanced really low self-esteem and feelings of shame, because it was a concrete way to say, well, you passed that, you must be okay. So the stress of it was nothing compared to the benefit of being validated for doing something that our culture values. So just if you're struggling in school, I just want to echo, stay in school because it really can be helpful. And then, Dr. Pierce, just a quick question. You are so you are so convincing in your role that I've wondered if you don't slip back and forth sometimes into actually feeling like Dr. Pierce and what that feels like.
You know, a lot of what I have to do is do interviews with, Us Weekly, and so obviously their line of questioning is incredibly in depth, and they'll say things to me like, you do so well, you must really be crazy, or do you feel crazy when you do something? It's like, look, I don't know, because none of us, we have to strive for empathy in order to overcome the stigma, but empathy is not ever fully understanding what anyone on this stage has been through, or anyone here that goes through it. So I don't know. I do know that the only way I remember all of those lines is to walk back and forth on the soundstage talking to myself like that. So eventually some of the crew comes up and goes, he's not acting. But no, I don't pretend to know how it feels, but I try. Sir.
Hi, thank you for this panel. I'm the director of USC's counseling service. I'm sitting next to another counseling center director. Many of our schools have new programs such as teaching faculty, students, and staff how to recognize kind of concerns. My question to the panel is, many times we have students call saying, I'm concerned about my roommate, my boyfriend. How would you have liked to have been approached by someone who loves you or a friend who are concerned about you? What would have been most helpful?
What could someone have said to you? How best could someone, whether it be a friend or someone at a faculty at one of the schools, how could they have said it that you might have heard it in a helpful way? Do you know what I mean?
I'm sure they tried.
Yeah.
I got into the hospital because when I was 50, I couldn't stop wanting to kill myself. just this thought constantly. And I wasn't using drugs or drinking. And my sister Glenn, I was about to drive away. We were visiting our mom in Wyoming, and I live in Montana, and I was about to take my daughter and leave after the visit, and I knew I had to say something. I just knew I had to say something for my children, if not for me. So before I knew it, I was in the hospital. You know, she just put her arms around me and let me cry, and it kind of all started to make sense to everybody.
I think that ideally you have someone, a friend, a friend or family member who can sort of bring you in with them. It's sort of like not like you really gotta go see a counselor, but like let's go. Let's go, or let's like get two or three people and let's go. But I think as faculty and sort of professionals, I think that a soft hand can be very important. Like I think it's really important to reassure someone like, we're not calling your parents and kicking you out of school because you do this. And I think sometimes we take it for granted that kids don't know that, or like because of your university's policies, you're lying if you tell them that. But like, we have to have it be so that person walks in and can be assured almost immediately that they're in a safe place and nothing they're doing right then is affecting anything that they don't want to affect. Like they're there to get the help that they want. They're not there to get the help that they owe you to get. I think that's a big thing. A lot of times we cast it as like, well, you owe it to your family to get help, or you owe it to the university, you owe it to your roommates to be safe and stuff like that. I don't think that's the right tone. I think it's you're there to get helped to the extent you want to be helped. So I don't know if that helps.
So when I broke down in Oxford and Yale, it was very florid, so there wasn't really a question how subtly to approach me. But since then, when I've had symptoms, I've turned to friends like Steve. I'll call my closest friends and say, I'm, whatever, and he can tell that something's going on. And every once in a while he asks if I would mind if he would call my doctor. And I always think, well, it's not really necessary, but if it will make you feel better, fine. So one day, my analyst was leaving town for 2 weeks, and for some reason I knew this, because you usually don't know where they go, but I knew he was going to China. So Steve called him up and said, Dr. So-and-so, I'm really worried about my friend Elyn, your patient. She says that you're going to China. She says she's going to go there in advance of you and clear it out of all the bad people. And he said, oh, how very considerate. But I've had close friends like Steve and my husband who sometimes sense things are slipping before I do. And for me, being supportive, it sounds to me like you're really having a hard time. You're scared. It's your illness acting up. We'll get through this together. Helps. I had a very severely bipolar illness friend I tried that with, and he got furious. How dare you say that? So it's not one size fits all.
Who has the mic?
Hi. Alyssa Solomon, and I'm really enjoying this. This is really wonderful. So thank you very much. I identify a lot with your character, although I've never seen the show, but I'm going to watch it.
Try it. You'll like it.
Yeah. I am wondering about this issue that you've somewhat spoken to, which is the idea of compartmentalizing compared with integration. And it sounds like you all have your own experiences, somewhat due to stigma, somewhat due to your job, and the idea of either compartmentalizing, not necessarily hiding, but just compartmentalizing different parts of yourself. I don't know if I'm being confusing or not, but if you can try.
I think maybe as I'm understanding you, sort of not hiding, but sort of saying this is something that I deal with here. This is sort of the thing. This is A, B, and C that I have to do to take care of myself, and this is sort of the other world that I live in. I guess I think of integration as sort of what I mentioned earlier, that like it's a part of you, like it is something that you're constantly sort of, it's a day-to-day job, it's sort of like taking care of yourself is like a 9-hour day or 24-hour day job. I kind of look at it that way, like it's involved in everything I do. It's silly. I mean, I haven't had any symptoms or a problem in 8 years, but it's still like it's a part of all the things I do. The things I do are to make myself feel the way I want to feel, and that's all the things I do. I don't know if that is at all what you were talking about.
I'm kind of wondering, I mean, how much you have to integrate and carry around with you this illness part or this issue part, and how much can you leave it or not leave it? And
I have a very structured existence, which I really like. I always take my meds at 7, go to bed at 10. Now this is compared to somebody who I used to just get at the most 2 hours sleep at night. And still sometimes I'm like, gosh, I would love to stay up all night just once, just one more time. And nope. Just can't do it. I also live in an extremely quiet place. Not even airplanes fly over in the foothills of some mountains in Montana. And that really helps my mental health a lot. A lot. There was a deer was just killed by a mountain lion on my property, so that's wild.
That is literally wild.
Just quick, I think that it's an individual thing too. Like, I know a lot of people who are very successful dealing with their illness by a much more compartmentalized approach. Just sort of like, I deal with it, I see my doctor, I take my medication. It's not who I am, it doesn't define who I am. I'm not part of some community, and for whatever reason, that works for them. So I think that it's individual. So I know people that works for better.
But I think to our subject, it seems to me as an outsider that only good can come from your own ability to do what you do, which is open with it if you need to, discuss it, be forthright and unapologetic, and take away your own stigma. It seems to me that we educate people on what to do if somebody has a heart attack, but we don't tell them what to do if they suddenly have a psychotic thing. And of course, what they're going to do, they're going to back away and fear for their life, as opposed to going, how can I help this person? And it's very hard to teach empathy. It's very hard. But It seems like college is a good place to hopefully start earlier than that. But this is a good place when everyone is here for higher learning, for higher understanding, that this is the time and place to instigate that. One more question.
Yes. Here.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. He's got the mic. Yes.
Urshid Oza here, and a big fan of Dr. Pierce, just to start. But the question is that we have been talking a lot of serious stuff here, but for every individual, what I think is that any mental issue is so very much concern and gravest concern for them. For example, not schizophrenia, but for me, I'm suffering from a social anxiety and being an obsessive compulsive personality. So right now it's shaking. So it happens. So what I'm gonna ask is that being in such an environment where you are constantly being judged and in a competitive world, how would you like the law students or any kind of students to deal with such kind where it's extremely difficult to pour out what you are suffering through?
I think, and I tell this to law students about a lot of stuff, you worry about yourself, like the whole judging yourself against everyone else and being judged and evaluated. I mean, there's nothing you can do. I mean, somebody said you shouldn't care about what other people think about you because it's none of your business. I mean, it's really you can't control what they think about you. Just do your thing, get the most out of what you can do, and just sort of be happy with it. You're never going to be, I'm never going to be normal or perfect or whatever. So.
If I ask in such a huge group that I want a picture with Dr. Pierce.
Elyn, I think you want to take over? Oh, so the lady had one question there. Can we do that one more question? This has to be brief because we have to give up the room. Yeah.
My question has to do with, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm kind of jealous of the three of you because I have a son who is non-compliant. He's 44, and what that means is, I think what it means is he doesn't really know that he has a problem. He knows
I think I don't know, that's why, I say try again. You just have to keep trying. I don't know, do you talk to him about his noncompliance? Does that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. My son Kalen, we suffered through him drinking a lot because he turned 21 when he had been in the hospital, and he wanted to drink. And he'd say, "Oh yeah, I just had one beer." Well, the one beer were one of those big, huge ones, and he finally, now at 33, he takes his medication. He knows what happens when he doesn't. So it's just going to take your son.
My son is 44.
Yeah.
And he is dual diagnosed, bipolar and any kind of substance.
Right.
He's off of substance for quite some time now, and so he identifies himself as an alcoholic. But he needs the medicine too.
Yeah.
And I think, thinking about Elyn, your story, it was not too far from that age in which you finally decided, I need to reconcile myself to living with this thing called schizophrenia.
The more I did that, the less it defined me. It became, much not so central to my identity.
The less you fought it, the less you had to fight it. All right. Thank you very, very much, all of you.